Story, take one. Good. Now, the most important part about the entire film is the story. And you have to understand story. Now, even myself, there are times when I don't understand story that well. And I think it's hard to be able to separate certain things, for some of those things are intertwined, because you've got plot, you've got story. So I hope my writer friends don't laugh at me for this. I think the difference between story and plot is this, if I understand correctly. Plot are the series of events that take place, whereas story is something else that is not the backdrop. So the plot will most of the time be the backdrop of what's happening. I'll give you an example. I did a film, the first feature film I did was called Zama Zama. The film, the events that take place in the film is that there's a mining boss, the guy who's like the manager, the mine manager, and they have to deal with illegal miners. And so they go through this process of trying to weed out the illegal miners in the mine. And in the process, his brother gets involved, and he has to stop the raid before they kill the brother, and so on and so forth. So the series of events is that it starts here, then we go into the mine, and then he comes across his brother, and he does all of these things, and then in the end they raid the place, and so on and so forth, and what. That is the plot. But the story in the midst of all of that is about two brothers and the reunification of the brothers. That is the story. And then the mining aspect is the backdrop. And I'll give you another example. A few years later from that, I did a film called Last Ones Out. And with Last Ones Out, it was about zombies in South Africa. The whole country had gone into a state of emergency. There were zombies everywhere. People had died. And you had these people that were the last people to get out of the country safely. So that's the plot, is that what happens is people are trying to get out safely. But the story is about how it was actually about love. How this guy met this girl and they understood the importance of not leaving the other. No one gets left behind. That is the story. Whereas the zombies are the backdrop, they're the plot. And you have to be able to separate those two things so that you know what you're focusing on in certain instances. Because then your music gets broken up. It gets broken up into plot point, following the plot, or you following the story. And your themes will be dictated by what's happening, but they'll also be dictated whether what's more important here. Is it the story, or is it the plot, or is it both? Whatever the case may be. And so your themes mostly will fall towards the story side. And then your sonic identity will fall towards your plot side. And now you need to be able to understand that story. And that's why that conversation with the director is important. Because he'll be able to outline to you and say, this story is about this. This is how we tell that story. Yes, there, you see, there it is. The plot is how you tell the story. The story is still just the story. So the plot is the method. So having that conversation with the director is very, very important, because then it helps you to be able to map it out and say, okay, we're creating the sonic identity, and this is how we're going to go ahead and tell the story in this way. But the themes, the characters, how you build their themes, how you build the subject matters, like the story themes. When we're talking about maybe the love aspect in the love theme, and how you create and compose for that, and then maybe the theme of duality. how then you need to find a way to compose for that as well. So you're composing for the characters, you're composing for the themes of the story, you're composing for the plot. There's so many things to consider, and with experience you learn when to do what. You learn when is it time to focus on the plot, when is it time to and knowing all of these things in advance, kind of like, the more you do this, the more you'll know. It will come naturally to know that, okay, here we're not just focusing on the drama, we're not just heightening the tension, we're actually pulling back and we're focusing on how they're feeling. Even though there's guns blazing, there's bullets flying everywhere, it's not always about creating that fast-paced music because there's that much action happening. Sometimes you have to pull back and then focus on the emotional content of that scene, and say, even though bazookas and explosions are going off right now, there is an emotional bond happening between these two soldiers because they're in this mess together, but there's a very particular bond, and sometimes that's what you compose for. That's what you create the music for, because we know that they're already fighting. There's already that information on the screen, like it's already tense. Their performances are telling you that it's tense. The world is falling apart. That's already telling you that. So what is the thing that you're not getting from the dialogue and the picture? The bond. And that bond is what you then take and you heighten. So the more you do it, the more you'll understand that you have to be able to identify what you're scoring for. There was a scene that I did in Queen Sono. And what was cool about Queen Sono is that working with Kagiso Lediga, he's very we have very deep discussions about what we're doing. And he'll watch it and then he'll give his opinion about certain things, but he'll give me an opportunity to explain exactly what I was going for, and then he'll give it another watch with that in mind. 9 out of 10 times I'll change his mind, because sometimes we see things that the director doesn't, and we hear things that the director may not even begin to imagine, which is why they hand that part of the film over to us. So in Queen Sono, there was a scene where unfortunately got taken out because how that situation goes, where I was scoring on the basis of what one of the characters' eyes were doing and his expression and what the expression was saying. And it wasn't about what was just happening. They had just basically diverted the enemy and they had escaped, but I didn't score according to their escape. I scored according to their the way they feel about the job and the way they fit into it emotionally. They know they're cool. They know they're good at it. They're not even afraid. They're just like heroes in a way. And I could see that in the character's eyes, and seeing that in the character's eyes was the perfect way to bring that aspect out, to say, these guys are pros, they're really cool, they know what they're doing, they're not worried, they're not even afraid, they're just like real heroes. And so that's what I was trying to pull out that's what I was pulling out of the scene. And so when he watched it for the first time, he was like, I'm not sure this should feel like this. And I'm like, okay, watch it again, but look at his face when you're busy watching it. And immediately he got it, and it stayed. He liked it. He's like, okay, don't change it. Eventually that whole scene got taken out, so you don't get an opportunity to see it. But those discussions are so important, and just knowing exactly where you fit in, knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, knowing what you're doing it for, every single note, at least from in my case, I can explain every single note that I put in. I can explain the instruments. I can explain exactly what I'm going for, and I can tell you why I do A, B, and C. With Queen Sono, I was given the freedom to decide exactly what I do and when I do it. And that freedom to decide added a lot more pressure to do my best work. And that's the kind of pressure that I always wish to have when working on a project, to get my best work out, is being given that freedom and the ownership of the score and say, you're the doctor, make a prescription for what we need for this music, and we'll talk about it afterwards. And that is the best way for a composer to work. There's no better way for a composer to do the best thing he can do for the story, make those decisions, and create that world.